And now, Mona Magick.
My guest with me, Jeff Harvey. You know Jeff Harvey from the last two episodes that I had, and there was very in-depth episodes, so do check those out. The first one was on detoxification, and the detoxification basically geared you towards the BioMind, let's say, fitness of what you needed in order to go forward to the next step of working with the Radionics equipment and system that Jeff has, and also too sells. Also too, this will give you the consultation that you do need to go on and to really encourage. Let's say, put yourself to that point of where you would like to be, and working with entities, really charging your sigils, and going forth in your spiritual path that we all talk about. But tonight's topic is quite is one of my favorites as well, because it's talking about increasing your success and evocation and your sensitivity to working with entities. Jeff has got some systems out there that I'd love for him to talk about, because he's the expert on this. And I'd like him to go for it right now. Jeff, you've got lots of information about working with evocation, and we've talked about radionics, we've talked about conditioning your mind, working with charging, and working with pathways and energies. Explain to everyone, if you will, what we're talking about tonight.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you in the last shows, and I really appreciate this one too, because we've got a lot of fun things to discuss tonight.
Well, when we're talking about evocation, we're talking about working with, let's say from the deeper arts, and I don't want to call them the darker arts, because I'm not into the dark and the light and the left-hand path and the right-hand path. Let's just talk about working with, our minds, working with our inner self, our spirits, and working with entities. Now, we spoke about radionics and charging our sigils last time, and working with, let's say, influencing others, focusing on, the thought forms and materializing. And you've got a system, the paranormal Shakti and Shiva system, that actually encourages this and takes us to another level. Can you explain really how this works out? Because you've got the radionics. Do you combine the two? Do you move from one area to the next? Because you mentioned in the first segment that we had together that it's about conditioning your body to be able to handle and to be able to balance this without, let's just say, the crutch of having to take the hallucinogens, the mushrooms, the snorting this and that, and taking the pills, popping the pills, but really conditioning yourself to do it at will, to do it at thought. Second, just a matter of just meditation. But tonight, we're talking about things on a different level.
Absolutely. The first thing people need to understand is, if you get your extracellular matrix clean, now your body, your brain, and your mind can function at a much higher level. And it's a simple thing to do. Just do a detox kit and off you go. And they're cheaper than dirt, so it's something everybody should do. The next thing that a lot of people do is they want to charge their sigils, or they want to link their mind to a particular entity or whatever it happens to be, or to an event. And the radionics does a beautiful job of that, because you can literally make your nervous system tell you when you've linked to it and set that trend up so it keeps going long into your operation, whether it's an evocation, an invocation, or an extended operation of some kind. But in order to be able to get really interesting success, you need a mind that's functioning with a brain, and the brain needs to be reasonably plastic. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the areas of your brain that are involved in these types of experiences, and we now know a good many of the structures and how they work with lucid dreaming and evocation and astral projection, things of that nature, out-of-body experiences, we know which brain structures are most active. So if you can get those brain structures to be more active than they were, the strength and the power behind your experiences gets ramped up quite a bit. So the Shiva and the Shakti neural stimulation systems, like Paranormal Shakti, they do a pretty interesting job of it. The Paranormal Shakti is the easiest one to use. It's the closest thing you'll get to a plug and play. And it's got a very pared down signal set. We took the regular 8-coil Shakti signal set and we stripped out only the signals that had the most effects that we got with almost all of the people that we had out there. And we set it up into 3 separate areas. One to increase your sensitivity to paranormal phenomenon. The second one to increase your paranormal phenomenon activity or experience or sensitivity at a site or off-site. And the last was to desensitize yourself. There are some people that are not interested in experiencing Aunt Flora's ghost out in the living room all the time or tuning into a particular entity. They don't want that. So we show them how to tune it down. And that same program for tuning it down can be used in reverse to actually get the frontal lobes more active, so later you can stimulate even more experiences if you need to. So it's quite an interesting set of signal sets that we can use to actually get the brain so that it's very flexible and very plastic, so that different brain structures that usually are not active, that could be contributing to your evocation or your operation, are now coming to the fore and you're getting better responses. So that's the Paranormal Shakti. The Shakti system, the 8-coil Shakti, has a lot more signals. However, it's more complicated to set up. And then the Shiva system is a combination of all 3. It's got the 16 coils instead of 8 coils. It has per-singer session and published experiment sessions that you can use in very high geomagnetic storm states. But it also can be broke down into the 8-coil Shakti, and it has all the software for both, and it's got the same signals that are being used in the Paranormal Shakti. So it's considered the granddaddy of them all. And these 3 devices are all used with your laptop or computer to generate signals that are very gentle and complex magnetic waves that stimulate those sections of the brain that have been proven to be active when you're having these things happen.
Okay. Let's go on to what actually can happen with these waves, because you're talking about seeing apparitions, you're talking about experiencing, let's just say, surreal events and insights. Is this a photogenic response of what you think about as a thought form, or would you say that this is something that you're actually opening up your mind and your optive mind, I should say, in a way to see things as they would be that other people don't see with their own eyes? In other words, is it BioMind or is it real?
Okay, it's all of the above, depending on what experience you get when you're doing it, and I'll give you some examples. I've had some fantastic astral projections with these technologies, just fantastic. I have had it stimulate increased, and I mean sometimes dramatically increased, lucid dreaming states. And I have also used it for infiltration purposes, psychically, into locations that I needed to go to. I've been to Langley using this device in my mind. I've been several other places to a couple of labs, and I won't tell you what they did in the lab, but I've been to a mountain entrance to a particular underground group, and these are infiltration things that I've been able to do with it. Now, when you're on the astral plane, that is a whole different ball of wax. That's as close to straight imagination as you get, and we don't really know whether or not those are other dimensions we're visiting, other realms we're visiting, or if it's just simply something that the mind concocted. We don't know in that regard. Then I've also had, and this is one that was interesting, I was using the Shiva system. I was running Persinger sessions, which is what I'm running right now, which have been amping up my perceptive abilities quite instantly. The number of times the phone rings now and I know who's on it, or I set a timer in the kitchen for something that's cooking, and within 2 seconds of it going off, I know it's going to go off, things like that. Many of these things happen. And it also, after 8 sessions, had given me one of the most powerful out-of-body experiences with an entity that I have ever had. This was really weird. I was laying in bed. I all of a sudden left my body and sat up. Someone was rubbing my feet. And in my out-of-body energy body, I looked down from sitting up, and there was nothing there. So I reached down, and I felt a figure there, a full body of a humanoid being, and it was female. So I've had some tremendous experiences with this technology in out-of-body, astral, and lucid dreaming. And it has yet to fail me that when I run these operations or these sessions, that I don't have really increased dream states for at least 3 to 4 nights afterwards, and sometimes for an entire week. And that's pretty staggering stuff. So some of it has also been precog, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We know what deja vu is. You go to a location and you say, I've been here before.
Sure.
Well, it gets to a whole different level with this. I was running a session, and I don't recall if this one was on the cerebellum or if it was one of the frontal lobe sessions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to go back through my notes. But I had a beautiful dream state one night, and it was interesting. I was out at a local coffee shop, and what was odd was the next day, I met a friend of mine that we were going to work on some radionics projects together at this same coffee shop. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, the events began to unfold exactly as they did in the dream state the night before. It was so staggering, and this has happened many times using these technologies. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most incredible experiences you'll have. You feel extremely excited when it happens because you realize you leapt forward in time and you watched what was going to happen the next day.
I see. Okay. Let's move forward because I'd like to pause on that aspect of it, but I'd like to go off into the actual intellect, the intellectual part of it, because I'm wondering whether or not you can actually use these sessions for increased knowledgeability to actually learn something such as a foreign language, a skill, or something, because you're talking about if you're trying to have some type of premonition of something, or if you're trying to connect with a particular entity or a thought form, it can be used for increased intellect or learning ability, to expand the capacity to retain information. You don't want it to be where is that you're connecting to a certain realm or something, and it cannot be used, because then you're always in that never ending land. You're always in the land of Oz. I'd like to bring it to some type of form of reality where you can use every day. Is it possible to actually use the sessions for this?
Okay. These devices are not to be used every day. However, we are going to be doing a series of experiments that I'll get into at another time that relate to that. But normally, you will do the experiments every 3 days, or every 7. And the difference between those two time frames follows the Ebbinghaus curve for memory retention. And so basically, in the end of 3 days, you're going to forget what you're going to forget from the session. You're going to remember what you're going to remember from the session.
Okay.
If you wait 7 days between a session and then you do another one, now your long-term memory will kick in and start writing a pathway for whatever skill sets or abilities or things that you're looking for that the session gave you. It will write those to long-term memory. And if you do between 3 and 6 sessions, 1 week apart, you will have mapped that about as good as you're going to get into your long-term memory. Now that's how you use it. Now let's look at something that I'm going to release here on your show that has not been released yet. I'm going to give everyone the latest protocol that I've tested that Todd came up with, and they're now using in the university because of the results I got from it. This is called the back-to-back session. And basically, it follows a couple of things that we find unique. And you were talking about doing an evocation or an invocation. And my suggestion when using these sessions is to set an intent before you do your session of what you want to accomplish. Then do your session, and as you're doing the session, you do it with earplugs in and in a darkened room after dark at night, because melatonin rises, and melatonin assists in these altered states of mind that we're looking for. It's very helpful in that. So if you do it during these periods, what happens is you blank your mind during the session, set your intent before the session, blank your mind during, and then you get whatever you get during the session for results, but around 90 minutes later, there is a doorway or a window that opens up in the mind that increases your other aptitudes quite dramatically. So if you were going to do an evocation that night, you would do your session first to increase your sensitivities, and then you would wait about an hour to an hour and a half. I would say an hour and a half is ideal. We haven't tested that yet to see what the perfect time is, and it may vary per individual, but an hour and a half is good. Then do your evocation, your meditation, or whatever operation you're trying to do, and it increases those abilities quite dramatically. So if you follow that, the new protocol we have that I'm releasing tonight is, if you take a session and you run the same session again 90 minutes later that night, we have gotten some really staggering results from it. And this is the first time this has been released to the public.
All right, and these results means that you can actually calculate a particular session in order to assure that it would actually happen again. So it's not a fluke. It's not a one-off. You can say, well, this is my intent. This is what I want to happen. And if I want this to happen recurrent times, I can set it at these particular settings, thereby getting the exact results over and over and over again.
I don't think that's the case. It's not the exact same results. I have gotten slightly different results every time I've done it, but they followed a similar theme.
I see.
Like most of the time, I'm usually getting a lucid dream afterwards, or I get astral projection all the time. That's nothing. That's almost mundane for me now. Out-of-body experiences increase a lot, and one night you may get an out-of-body experience, another you might get a lucid dream, or you may just get an astral projection. But by setting your intent beforehand, you basically guide the subconscious towards what you're after, and you got 2 shots that night to do it. If you're doing back-to-back sessions, you set it the first time and see what you get, and we've found a lot of times that the second session gets us much better results. So I don't know that it's an exact science yet, and we're still working on that. But when you've got all these different signals and hundreds of places to place those coils, you literally have a couple of 100 to 1,000 or so combinations you can try to change different brain states or get more areas active. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing all the lab work, is to see if we can find a way to reliably get the exact same result every time. That's what we're looking for.
Well, I imagine you couldn't possibly get the same exact results all the time because it's different, the coordinates of each situation in a person and the likelihood of any situation being the same, identical situation with the, even with the same people was going to be unlikely that time of the day or, the way a person's feeling or whatever. So it's the most likely probable, let's just say, scenario would come out in that way. But, each scenario is different and unique. I'd like to move off into something, and I'll be very blunt about this because I interchange with and speak to people from all levels of the occult and talking about evocation and spell work to from everything in the occult of what you want to do and what you want to come about and have. Now, when you're talking about evocation, the first thing that pops up in people's mind is, hey, I'm going to go through these 72 Gotia type of, demons and invoke this and that. I'll get this going and I'll do this and I'll bring about that and voila. I really don't know what the hell people think they're going to do once, a particular entity comes to them and it's the first time that they meet or they encounter this entity, because it's almost like inviting, hey, haven't you seen that person down the street? Wouldn't you like to have that person come over? So that person comes over. You've never met this person. You don't know. You don't have a relationship with this person. So what's supposed to happen? It's about the relationship if you're talking about a tangible, or let's just say a valid entity and not a thought form per se. So let's just talk about evocation at this point, at this moment. How is this actually going to happen? Have you been able to encapsulate in your testing what people collectively say about the evocation and what they've actually evoked, to a point of giving people out there what they can actually look forward to? Because I'm thinking, and I think that we've spoken about it, off air a few times, that people really, honestly, Jeff, I have to say, honestly, some people just don't give a damn about anything other than, hey, I want a damn evocation. I want it to happen now. I want to see some grueling demon pop up in front of me, and I want to see this now. So I'm asking you, let's just go the cheap route. Just humor me for a little minute. How soon can someone evoke what they want to evoke?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know how accurate my answer will be because of the differences in each person doing it. But I'll tell you one example of a young man. His name is Mike. He was very interested in getting involved in the occult, and his goal is he wanted to go talk to Azazel. So he had been working with the Paranormal Shakti system for a while. We had been doing a certain particular program which involved the temporal lobes and the frontal lobe. And he did this repeatedly. And it was interesting because in one of his very first sessions, he found himself standing in front of Azazel's throne having this long-winded conversation with him. The bad news was he didn't remember a whole lot of it afterwards because he was so bowled over by it, which goes right to your question of what do they think they're going to do? They don't have a plan, most people, when they go into it. He had a pretty good idea of what he was interested in and what he was going to do, but he had never had to remember anything from that kind of an experience in his life before. So he didn't know to set his intention to remember it, to pick out key words, to emphasize them with emotion, so that the download into the conscious mind, when he got out of that particular frame of mind, actually downloaded the whole conversation. Had he had that, he could have written probably a mini book on it because he was in there a long time and he had a very long conversation. So this is the kind of thing that can happen. And a lot of it simply is, can I get my brain plastic enough to get those areas active enough to have an experience? And that's what we work on, is getting it plastic enough for you.
I see. So I was wondering, have you actually collectively, well, let's just say, for instance, you've been doing this for a very, well, let's say for a while. I don't know exactly how many years, but the many years, probably, more time than, many years than most people who've actually been doing it. And I'm sure that you collectively have done it with other people who know this. Have you ever been in the same room and experienced the same entity or event? Because I'm trying to cross the barrier of this being a very personal, which it is personal, of course, but a personal experience, opposed to, okay, fine, this is not just in everyone's head. It's not messing with everyone's, brain to think, okay, fine, I see this and you don't see it, because I'm really trying to get out of this thing about, oh, this person's just messing with their mind. And I really do see this as something, whereas it's actually venturing into another realm. But there's that fine line as to what the mind sees and experiences. And then there's that silly, stupid thing that everybody, I get into the argument a lot, to the point I don't even argue with people anymore. The schematics of, okay, fine, what is real? So what I'm asking you is that, because you are amongst the people and even patients that have worked with these sessions and, the radionics and so have you gotten to a point of a collective realness? Or is it always secular within a mindset that you cannot share with someone else, and you say, hey, dude, did you feel that? Yeah, it was awesome. No, it's not about that. I'm asking you, have you collectively noted that you've actually been in the same place, same time, because you both have entered into a realm collectively, because you have the same experience with the actual sessions?
All right. I personally do not allow anyone to do a session with me. And the reason I do that is because some of the reasons why I do sessions, and they're quite personal. And when I do infiltration work, that's a whole different ball of wax. And I don't want anybody else doing what I do, because if they're not able to protect themselves and they go somewhere, and let's say we happen to invade somebody's lab, and that lab is protected by other people with psychic skills for detection, you could wind up with some issues. I don't, because of what I do. So I don't allow people to do it with me. Now, having said that, at university, they have done telepathy experiments with two people in adjacent rooms, where they have both had the helmets on, and they've had beautiful linkages between each other. Totally different systems, but they're both running a session, and they are linking. Now, we know for a fact that the linking that we do in many ways between human beings is via magnetic signatures. We also know that ghosts are consciousness imprints in certain locations, and that consciousness is almost complete, so you could actually have a conversation. But why people are able to pick up on that has a lot to do with how the magnetic fields are affecting their particular mind, which is why we're using general complex magnetic signals to do our work. And that's why we get such good results, because we're using exactly what the brain naturally does to do what we do. We're simply making the brain a little more plastic so it can access these things.
Have you gotten to the point where is that because your mind and let's say I don't want to really excuse my ignorance of the language that I'm using, but I would call them frequencies or wavelengths of what you're actually opening up. You're allowing yourself to actually be open as a receptor without these devices as well. That is my feeling from this, and I would just like to understand: have you found yourself not actually needing the actual the sessions and the system, because as you mentioned, your mind remembers it, and you've mentioned that you've gone from 3 days, you've gone from 7 days. So I'm assuming that you're opening up these currents each time. I'm assuming that each time you do open this up, you're actually allowing yourself to receive. So I'm picking up that you've gotten to the point whereby you can interchangeably, as you mentioned, do this at will anytime you like. But where is a stopping point? Where is a growth point? Where are you going with this? Because at some point there has to be an elevation that you've made to escalate yourself to a higher level than most people starting off with this. So what can people look forward to at your particular level?
Okay, and this is a fun question because we're going to talk about effector and affector. All right, you were talking about letting things in, whereas this technology, this particular one, is more of an effector. It basically allows the brain to do these things that it should be able to do anyway, but because it's lost some of its plasticity, you're able to bring it back to a much younger state of plasticity so it can do those things again. Now, that's one piece of this answer. Next, let's talk about session schedules, because remember I said if you do a 7-day schedule and you do like 6 sessions in a row, you've mapped long-term memory about as good as it's going to get. And in most regards, we'll run 6 sessions and then we'll take like a couple of weeks break. Usually 3 weeks, sometimes 21 days, I think was the number that we were recommending. But what we do is we do that to allow any residual effects to ebb away. And I've gotten to the point where I'll run my 6th session and then I stop running it for, let's say, 3 weeks. And in my dream states, over the next 3 weeks, I can recruit those same effects directly in. This is called recruitment. And it's basically because your long-term memory remembered how to do it. So you literally tune yourself up to the point where all this is possible. Now, let's talk about what really happens, because you're asking me, where am I now? Now, I started in 2010. We're only looking at a little over 2 years with this particular technology. It has staggering results very quickly, believe me. So most of the people that have great results are people who have exceptionally good visualization skills, people who work on the right side of their brain a lot. If you are an attorney or a postal clerk that works on numbers or math formulas or things like that all the time, which is all left brain work, it takes a long time to get your brain plastic enough on the right to have great experiences. But if you're somebody who can meditate successfully, keep your brain blank, and you have the ability to use the right side of your brain, you get pretty good results right off the bat. Now, you ask, where am I at this point? And the way I look at it is kind of odd, because you know me already. You've got a sense of who I am and what I'm like, and I'm Mr. Exploration. So for me to stop exploring, that happens when I'm somewhere under the dirt. Up until then, I expect to be doing it till a couple of seconds before I cry. But what happens is that you have literally a couple of thousand combinations of coils and signal types, placements, and volume levels on the signals that you can use to stimulate these experiences and sessions. I will not live long enough to test them all. I just can't imagine living that long. That's a lot of sessions, considering you're doing them every 3 days or every 7 days. So there is so much to experiment with. I never run out of neat new things to test. And Todd Murphy, who is the developer of the technology, he's the one who actually built these devices. He is constantly coming up with brand new session designs, as so am I. And I'll say, hey, what if we place our coils like this? Mm-hmm. And he'll say, well, that would do this, this, and this, and it's likely to recruit this. You'd have to be careful of this because you want more of an enjoyable experience instead of a fear-based experience. You know, certain structures in your brain produce fear, certain produce anger, certain produce happiness, ecstasy, and we're more of the opinion we want to have ecstasy and great experiences. So we set session designs up that we can test those things. So where am I at now? I'm at the point now where I think about, in the beginning, your first thing is, hey, I want lucid dreaming. I want an out-of-body experience. Well, I've already had sex with entities out of my body. That's nothing new. I have had tremendous relationships. I've kissed a couple of thousand women on the astral plane. No big deal. All great things to aspire to when you're young and interested. Now that I'm getting to the point where a lot of that is mundane for me, and I'm interested in exploration, I no longer have the interest in just average things. I want to cross dimensional barriers. I want to access other timelines and live them in a state in the session, and then come back to this timeline and have literally vivid memories of how to incorporate it into this one.
I see.
I want to be able to literally, now I've remote viewed Mars just like Ingo Swann did, and I got almost identical results to him, so we know it's inhabited. One of my goals is to do an infiltration of that base, and I want to find out what's up there, and I want to feel it and see it and experience it. So where I'm at now is I'm interested in breaking all the bounds and barriers of things that people aren't normally interested in going and doing. I want to see what 45 stars over is like. I want to see what 18 moons the other direction is like. I want to experience those things. So those are the kind of things I'm looking forward to.
I see. Yeah, those are endless possibilities. Are there? Well, I believe I read, because I'm always picking up scientific magazines and things like that, about the assumed mind, neuroscience, scientific possibilities that you could possibly come up with the equations of what the brain can actually do. For both you and Todd, from you at least, I know that there are a lot of esoteric, let's say, pinpoints that you would like to, or milestones that you could possibly name to the public. But are there other areas that are, let's not even talk about the mundane, because some of these things that, when people talk about evocation, big deal. Okay, you can do it. If you really know what you're doing, you can do it. You don't need a device, and sometimes you do need a device if you're not at that particular point. But there are so many other things you can possibly amount to. Are there certain combinations that you have on the horizons that you would like to share with the public? Because, for instance, you mentioned lucid dreaming. About maybe 30 years in the past, lucid dreaming was, whoa, lucid dreaming, astral projection, whoa, and now it's evocation. But there's certain other things that you could possibly name that are on the horizons, because you've mentioned about other dimensions. But if you think about life itself, and you think about frames per second of where you're at, we're all, nothing is repeated, nothing, everything stays stagnant to where it is. That's why if you go in the past, you can always revisit it because it stays there. So for you to say that you may not be living, you may be living because you could already be dead, and you're just, reliving this past. So can you elaborate on some of the most extreme milestones that you would like to achieve in the upcoming years, in the next, I would say, even 5 years?
All right, I'll answer that question, but first I'm going to go over two very mundane things that maybe would be worth commenting on. Todd gave me a session design. And what we are wondering is whether or not there would be physiological changes in the body using this particular session. I'm diabetic, as you probably know, and my blood sugars dropped by 70 points when I was running this particular session over the course of a few weeks. That particular session is pretty interesting, and we need to do some more exploration of it and do a more controlled look at it to see what the scoops could be. But that's something that I'd like to accomplish. The other one is we have a session that's beautiful for mood. It's called the feel-good session. Could you imagine somebody who, on a regular basis, doesn't feel like they're in a great mood all the time? And they could run a session that could perk their mood up over the course of several weeks. because if they do it every 7 days, they get those long-term pathways generated. And so all that moodiness that they had over the last decade, you could rewrite new pathways and actually have them chipper. I know this is possible because I know a woman who has one of these who had an issue with that sort of issue, with mood, and we ran this particular new session design, and she is pretty darn chipper. Every time we talk on the phone now, she's as bubbly gets. So there are many different things we'd like to play with, but when you talk about seriously esoteric places that I want to go, I want to find a way to set it up so that we can consistently not just move out of body, but I want to have it set so that we can literally go explore the entire universe at will and be able to go there. And as you know, if you've done any studying of remote viewing and astral projection, when you show up at a site, there is a huge influx of photons in the room you're in. And they put photon detectors in a lot of these places, and they've sent remote viewers to them, and the detectors go wild. So we know for a fact that your energy body puts out light when you're at a location. So some of the more esoteric things I want to do is I want to get some photodetectors at some different locations, and I want to do a couple of tests. And then what I want to do is I want to validate or verify the astral projection that it's accurate. And I'll give you an example. After one of these sessions, I went and found myself, and this is when I was doing an astral projection with a cue, with a Radionics cue, with a remote viewing cue, all in one session. It was wild. And I found myself hovering a couple of 100 feet above a bridge in a town that I'd never been to before that I recall. And it was very wooded. There are houses in between all the woods. It was, your average small town. And what I didn't do before I left there was I didn't go and try and find out what the name of the sign coming into the town was. That's one of the experiments I want to do to verify where someone has been when they do one of these and verify that it's actually in this realm, this plane, and this timeline when we do it.
Well, I think I had some, a few, probably about a month or so back, or, when I had interviewed you via podcast, I had mentioned to you about, my similar situation where I was trying to figure out whether or not when you did, not you, but when one does do remote viewing, is it a precognition of something, to happen, or is it something that, they're actually there at that particular time to show whether or not they, just as your example was, whether or not something has happened or you're going to see something to happen. And from my experience, it has actually been to visit that point in time rather than to do it at the actual point, because there was a time where I had actually seen ahead of where I had gone, and I realized that once I'd gotten there, it was not the same point in time, thereby being a remote viewing rather than a premonition of something to be. So with that given, if you're saying that you can actually visit the place at that particular time, you're talking about stretching the mind and stretching the capacity to actually venture out into something, something that they haven't really been able to reproduce often, in a laboratory. And well, they probably have, but really haven't released the information as such. And that's something that many people could use, and evocation, and in just everyday life. It's not just limited to the occult and the occult sciences, it's something, finding missing children, family situations, and really helping out. So it has a greater significance beyond the point of just a self-gratifying feeling of knowing that you can actually go beyond. Would you agree with that?
I do. And there's so much you can get accomplished doing these things, and in remote viewing, you can, and by the way, remote viewing and radionics is really close, and the Shiva and Shakti systems are very closely related. That's why I've combined all three of them. But you can literally pick a point and a place in time and go there. But what you have to do if you're going to do it really well is not do coordinate remote viewing. You want to do a soul travel or an astral projection to the site, and that takes a little bit more mind control to accomplish than just doing, say, a coordinate remote viewing where you remote view a particular location or set up a queue for it. So your abilities are only limited by what you believe you can do in most regards. You can go forward, you can go back in time, and I'm of the opinion you can cross timelines.
With that given, I would like to address something that I believe that I have a habit of, bringing, through the conversations that we've mentioned, and that is not so much protecting yourself, but with these situations, I've experienced entities, and I've experienced myself and seeing that of other people being tagged by other entities, let's say, piggybacking on the situation of someone else's venture. If you're going and you're visiting, you're doing remote viewing, you're doing this, and that, it's not to say that someone's going to, snatch you and do whatever the case may be. How do you not get lost in translation, in transport? How do you not get tagged by having something else come through once you do come to within your own realm of where you normally and physically and mentally are? Have you been able to, because you've mentioned yourself that you don't mix with someone else, or you don't you don't collaborate within the same session with someone. There has to be a reason for that. So how is someone going to guard themselves? Because you've given the aspect of, the biological physiology of making sure that you keep yourself together. You've mentioned about the conditioning and knowing about the elements and knowing about, the various arts to work with, the planetary aspects and whatever rituals that you use. But there hasn't been as much, and I would like is to hope that you can actually cover how to condition yourself to be strong enough for, let's just say, shit happens. Because
okay, first of all, let's address the first one, which was one that I'm not going to glibly dismiss it, but it's my ignorance, my response. You were saying, how do you not get lost in translation on the way back from one of those projections? And in my ignorance, I don't know the real answer to it. I honestly don't. I just know it has not ever happened to me, and I have never heard of it happening to anyone else. So I'm assuming, that word, that somehow in the human condition or psyche, in a normal person, I'm not saying somebody with temporal lobe epilepsy or something.
Yes, right.
But in a normal person, we seem to have some sort of a rock-solid link into this reality. So I don't think there's much choice. Now, you hear a lot of stories out there about people who talk about quantum jumping, where you envision a new paradigm or a new dimension, where in that timeline you're having a fabulous life, and you can actually go live it by jumping into that one. And my question, first of all, is what were you smoking? Number two, what happens to the person that was in that timeline? What, do they come back and live your crappy life? That's really great. Nice of you to do that to somebody. So I don't really think quantum jumping is anything that I believe in at this point, but I'm holding open that if I see data or I experience something that tells me it's possible, you'll hear me reverse my position on that. As far as having something attached to you and come back, Richard Allen Miller, who is a amazingly brilliant man, He was damaged early in life. His brain never rewired from age 4 to 7 like it normally does. So when you talk to him now, he still giggles like a little kid when he talks to you. And I just think it's precious. But you're talking to a physicist, so don't think for a moment you're talking to a child. But this guy is amazing, and his thought is, and he does a lot of work. He is a magician. He works on magic of all kinds, and he's pretty good at it. And he says that in remote viewing, you have the possibility of bringing little sticky guys back with you that can piggyback and come back. Now, I'm going to give you a very honest answer. I don't know if I have ever brought anything back with me. I have not ever felt like I did. But again, I'm your average dense guy, so I may not be that sensitive. When a woman wants to go out with me, it takes them usually a few weeks to get it across that enough hints that I get it. So I'm not very sensitive with regards to a lot of things. So when it comes to an entity coming back with me, I have never noticed anything like that. And the only times I've felt anything in my room or my building was when I was getting visited for a specific purpose. When there was one entity that I told you about earlier in the Radionics show, that appeared in my living room. And that was just one of those times when I asked, why are you here? And the entity said it was watching me. And I said, for how long? And it said, for a very, very long time. So evidently since I was a child when I first started seeing those things. Whether or not those are real or those are something that come out of your subconscious, I don't honestly know. I doubt that they come out of the subconscious, but whatever they are, whatever they're made out of, doesn't really matter. Because as far as your other question about making yourself strong enough so you can solve that problem, I am a fan of every day doing a little meditation, going inside yourself, and doing the inner exploratory work. If you want a great way of going inside, go get a mirror. First thing in the morning, stand in front of it, look into your eyes. Don't worry about what your hair's like or whether or not the makeup's on. Just get in there and take a look and talk to yourself about how you lived your life yesterday, the day before, last week, last month, the last few years, the last decade, and all of your life. Stand there for 5, 10, 15 minutes and look in your eyes and have that conversation. What that does is it makes you brutally honest with yourself. That makes you unbelievably strong. Because if you don't lie to yourself when you're doing that, and then when it comes time when you do have to face some sort of an entity or whatever that's giving you a problem, you don't just stand your ground, you banish it. And as Richard Allen Miller says, he says, whatever you think will banish it, will banish it. So whether it's a smoking rag of sage or a piece of incense or a banishing ritual, whatever it is, as long as your subconscious knows for a fact it will go away because of this, you're good. So making your mind as strong as possible starts with making yourself as honest with yourself as possible. So I think that's the key to getting your mind where it needs to be to do these things.
I would like to comment on just something totally off the topic, though, because honestly, I have listened to you, Jeff, and honestly, you are one of the very few people that is able to follow through the 3-question scenario that I usually give, because sometimes when I give questions, I give them one by one. But many times, because I've collected all this information, I just, blurt it out 3 at a time, and people say, whoa, what did you just say? And I'm thinking, what did I just say? So I have to say thanks for that, because that's very impressive, because I know I do put a lot out there, and each time you've come back and I've asked 3 questions and you've answered every single one of them. So I'm not going to give you a test or anything like that, but well done for that. that's really great.
Part of that happens to be I enjoy the way your mind works. You're even, you're level, You don't have the ego issues most radio hosts do. And so you have an inquisitive mind. And I got to tell you, if we were children at 5 years old, we would both be in a sandbox somewhere, and we would be talking about all this stuff and whatever we saw. Because you can tell when you meet people like this that these are fellow explorers. And so I'm interested in the things that you have for questions, because most of them are the ones I love.
Yes, well, I have to say that the devices that you've got have really intrigued me, mainly because I do, as I mentioned to you, I do lots of things very naturally. And I'm very curious as to how other people do things in my way, cheating, because I don't use anything, and I figured if someone's going to do something without that, how are they actually going to manage that? That's sort of like there was a period where I didn't have any alcohol. I mean, I can down a bottle of champagne. I love champagne, but there was a period where I was going out, and I'd gone out for dancing with a few people, and to be with people under the influence of alcohol, and you're sober, you sort of it's very hard to relate to people. Being with people who are working with evocation, and they feel that they have to, say a couple chants and do, carry a couple talismans and do this, and all that. Sometimes I can't connect with it, because it becomes a lot of dogma and a lot of rhetorical things that some people don't even know why they do what they do. They just do it. So what you're offering is something that people can actually bring to their own inner self, to make to enhance their own ability, and that's why it's really intrigued me. But the magical question I've got for you is that we've spoken about the detox. I can understand that wholeheartedly, because if your mind is not together, and people can really relate to this. If you if you're all of a sudden thinking that you need to have that crutch of being with the crowd and having a joint or two, snorting some cocaine or whatever you need to do, freebasing, I don't know what they do these days, whatever you do to keep up to that point, having some mushrooms or whatever, and then zone out and do it without all that help. It's a big difference. It's a big difference to keep your body together. And the detox, I totally understand. The radionics, I understand, because of the energy and the waves and just the intent of how it works. The Shotki and the sessions that you've got, I understand all that, but putting it all together, have you and Todd come up with a different device or a collective device that just puts every single thing together? Because it sounds like there is, one room for the actual, the actual radionics. There's one room for, the actual, paranormal Shotki systems and everything. But is there one that just brings everything together? Because you're talking about one mind that you're putting people through different sessions and different themes, when really there could be this one system that just kick ass and just says, voila, you are one awesome person. You can do this, and it's reformed your being to endless possibilities.
If there was one device like that, I would already own it.
Okay.
That's a quick and dirty answer, but let's go over the real reality of my devices. Why am I doing it? Because when I was younger, I could do all those same things you're doing right now, without any crutches at all. But because I treated my body like a cesspool for many years, I got hit with depleted uranium and gamma radiation, and I had a lot of damage, and many things have happened. So I nearly died in 2003 because of all this stuff. So for me, I didn't have any of that stuff for many years. It went away. It totally left, and I had nothing. And when I learned remote viewing, the right side of my brain opened back up, and I started having some of this again, which made me thirsty like a guy in the desert without a camel. I was literally like, God, I need more of this. I remember this was great stuff. And so I sought out some devices with the goal in mind of getting myself having these again, so I didn't need to use a device. And I'm at that point now. I still use the devices because there's some new experiments I want to test that I can't test just with my own mind, and I want to further the science of these devices because, like me, there are many people that stopped having those experiences because of whatever reason, and it's usually toxin deposition. So I want to further this science, so I've dedicated myself to testing these technologies and developing new ways of using them. And because of my electronics background from Navy intelligence, I'm able to contribute quite a bit to this because I've got a bit of a physics background, I understand this, and I've got a lot of the similar experiences you have from childhood. So the real goal is just to use these devices as a short-term crutch to get the brain active in doing this again. And if once in a while you just pop it in there again to keep things stimulated, that's great. But they're not meant to be a forever thing. They were originally meant just to get you rolling again so you can actually be like the rest of the world that can do these things. For me, now it's become an actual vocation. I work with Todd Murphy. We develop all kinds of new programs for people. So it's actually now part of my job.
I see. Well, I tell you, it's not about being normal because not everyone normal can work upon just do evocation. Come on, you know. I can name several hundred people who cannot do that. I'm assuming they cannot. Yeah, so it's not about being normal at all. I wouldn't say so.
No, I think what I mean by normal is to have the normal abilities to do that. But it does take training to learn how. But you should have the capacity for it if you're normal.
Yes, indeed. I would say so. Well, with that, you've got the devices, and I believe that there's a Shotki and there's the Shiva one. Did you mention there were 3 devices?
Yes, the paranormal Shotki is the easiest one to use. It has the least number of signals that are the most effective. The Shakti, the 8-coil Shakti system, has many more signals, but it's a little more complex to set up. The Shiva system is a lot more complex to set up because it has 16 coils. If you look behind me off my one shoulder, you can see the 16-coil Shiva, and next to that is the 8-coil Shakti system. So there are 3 separate systems, and it depends on what you're trying to do. If you are a person who can't set up a different session every time by plugging in the coils to their proper locations, maybe you want the paranormal Shakti, which has less locations to work with. But if you want to be able to experiment and have hundreds of sessions, Shakti is a good machine. But if you want the maximum that's available, the Shiva system has 16 coils, and it will break down into the other 2 systems.
I see. And do you and Todd upgrade? Is it compatible via Mac and PC? Because these days you've got to have a choice.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're only PC. However, we know of some people that have used Parallels on the Mac.
Oh, I see.
And by using the Parallels program, they've been able to run these sessions. Mike, the fellow doing the Evocation work, he has a Mac, and he ran Parallels, and he was able to run these sessions just fine. He was the one who was standing in front of the throne of the Zazel for such a long session.
I see. And the experience that he received, was that a desirable experience? Was a very profound experience? Where is it he's still baffled, or is he shaken?
I was a little concerned, and the reason why he was so damned excited, I thought I was going to have to lock him up for a week till he calmed down. He loved doing that.
Okay, all right. Well, that pretty much sums the show up, because I tell you, you cannot stop talking about this because there's endless things, possibilities and expansions and places mentally, and not so much even mentally, but even, let's say surreal places that you can actually go and a person can actually want to go. all sorts of things are just going on through my mind because I find it fascinating, what this device, the three devices, especially, the actual Shiva one, it can actually, amount to, can expand your horizons. I can assume that you're not going to be hanging up your head device anytime soon, and it's going to be something that you're going to do over and over again. Because if I'm not mistaken, one of the very first times I spoke to you, it seems like you were on a mental high or something. I said, you know what? I had just spoken to you. I said, you know what? This man has done this many times. It hasn't been just one time and two times. You can actually tell the difference, and your I don't know if it is what it is, your persona or something of what you've experienced from this, and it would be interesting to speak with someone who's tried it for the very first time, if they can actually, give their experience, because you're a bit of a guy who's been around the block a few times with this now. I would have to assume so, because I couldn't really encapsulate the actual experience from, a newbie and you. It's not the same thing, I would say.
I absolutely love what I do. This is.
I bet you do.
People say, "What do you do for a living?" And I say, "I play with my brain."
Oh my
because
goodness!
It's like a kid in a sandbox with a group of Tonka toys. I got different places I can put my toys. I got all kinds of setups. Oh, it's just. I'm sorry. I'm just having way too much fun in life.
Who was the oldest person you've ever worked with in regards to this? Because I'm just curious as to how far the actual, depending on the age of the person, how far they can actually expand this. Because depending on your age, you can be very young and very creative, as you mentioned, the right side of the brain. And then you've got someone who's old. I mean, have you experienced different things from age groups, from extreme people from being very left-sided brained, to people being very creative and switching over? Or what are the vast differences that you perceived in your reports?
The oldest people that I've worked with, I'm sure the university has worked with older, but I've worked with people in their 60s, and I think the people who have the wildest effects are the people who operate on the right side of their brain a lot anyway.
Yes,
people who can do meditation, people who paint, who play music. If you play music of your own making, you access your right side of the brain. If you play music only from sheet music from other people, that's a lot less right-brained and a lot more left-brained.
Definitely.
So people who operate on the right side of the brain, you might as well just give them a candy store, because it really turns them on. I've taken people who have had ET contact experiences as children, and they miss it. They wanted it again, and they've actually used the system, and on their very first session, they regained contact. I don't know how that works, but we know for a fact it has. So when you talk about entity contact, we're talking about all kinds of entities.
Indeed. I would like to just, close this up, and also to mention, and I would like to get your feedback on this as well, because, we're talking about the left and the right side of the brain, and, I believe, if I can recall, that the brain is in four, quadrants, and really putting things where they should be, because you mentioned the creative side is governed by the right side of the brain. But I have to also say that because I've been tested a lot of times, I'm pretty much right in that middle part, definitely in the middle part. And I've noticed something, that with the device that you've got, because I've thought about it very carefully, you're absolutely right. The right side of the brain would bring about the creativity. But with not having so much of the actual left side of the brain, of the actual reasoning aspect of it, would you say that your devices are very intuitive, whereas that someone creative would understand the technicalities behind how this is used, because it has to take some type of intellect. And I'm not saying and discrediting someone who's very creative as being, dense, because some people think I'm dense and I'm not. But I'm also very technical. So would you say that it would take someone to balance, and this helps to balance the actual wave of the mind, because you couldn't possibly be that creative and understand the technical aspects of the devices that you and Todd have spent so much time doing?
All right, that's an interesting question, because a lot of people out there, they talk about using hemisync and other things to balance both sides of the brain, and they think that that's the holy grail, when in fact, if you go to any neuroscience department, you'll quickly find out that that's hogwash. Basically, when you're having these experiences, only one dominant brain part is the most active. However, there are always communications between multiple sections and across multiple sides. So the understanding of how to use these technologies, it comes down to, let's take Shakti for a second. We were to pick out a session, and we went into, let's say, the consciousness signal, and we applied it to a certain location on the brain with the coils. You just move the coils wherever you want. You can set these things up any way you want to experiment with anything, but the more you know about the different brain parts and what they're responsible in, the better able you'll be to come up with new ways of setting the coils and signals up to have better experiences. So it's one of those things where if you're just going to do straight experimentation, you can simply try hundreds of different combinations. But if you want to try ones we've already tested, we'll help you with that. You can literally send an email into tech support at brainsci@jps.net, and you can literally say, hey, look, I want to do this, and we have a questionnaire inside the software that will actually tell you how your brain's wired. Our neurology department will go take a look at it and say, okay, this is the way your brain's wired. This session would be a great one to start with. And you can get advice that way. So there's no need to be incredibly technically oriented to do any of this. It's just follow the directions and read the manual.
Well, it's very intense. I didn't know that you went through that extreme to actually let a person know, how they're wired. Because with that, evocation, invocation, contact, remote viewing, anything that you want, it's beyond the sky to even be a limit. You're talking about limitless possibilities. So with that, I'd love everyone to just visit your site. I'd love everyone to just, give it a go and contact you, because it's enough talking about this already. I'd say, stop talking about it and really shoot for it. I mean, go for it. Test yourself. Put yourself, push yourself beyond the limits. Because I have a question, and then just a challenge for everyone. If you've been doing, your rituals, at one point people used to pray. You pray for all your damn life. Then some people say, okay, fine, it's the projection of what you want. It's the, mind over matter thing. It's the positive projection of something. If that's gotten you far, then fine. If prayer has gotten you far, then fine. If the evocation that you've done so far, you're seeing everything, you're meeting everything that you want, fine. But if you'd like to push it, if you'd like to actually expand and really go internally, spiritually, just everything, giving it all you got, give it a chance. Because I just do feel that the device that you've got is well worth giving it a chance if all else hasn't got a person to the plateau that they've anticipated, and they've put all these years, put all the books into, all the money going to, ordering from Amazon, going to this particular order, that particular order. Try it out and see exactly how it works out. And I'd love for you to email me as well, let me know. And of course, Jeff, because I'd love to do another session with you to see exactly how things are going, in about a couple months' time, to see, really how some of these exercises that you've come up with just recently, to see, how they've gone.
My pleasure. I'd love to.
Yes. Well, with that, everyone, it's been a pleasure having you, Jeff. It's been a lot of information. I'd love everyone to just review all the information that, we've got here on the video and to visit Jeff's website and really play this all over again. So, Jeff, thank you again, and it's been great having you back on the show.
Thank you. Thank you again.